From OMG to WTF, the New York Mets 2025 season has come to an end. Let's dive into this train wreck. Who is to blame? And more importantly, where do the New York Mets go from here? All this and more coming up on Rich Sports Talk. And hello, everyone, and welcome to Rich Sports Talk as we are having an eulogy for the 2025 season. And I wanted to start off this episode and looking back at the season as a whole, going through this roster piece by piece, assigning blame, and then looking forward to 2026. I don't have to get into the games. We've gone through them over in our heads. We understand this team was 38-55 since June 13th. We understand what happened over the past weekend. We understand this team couldn't take 2 or 3 from the Nationals or 2 or 3 from the Marlins. So I wanted to move on and look at what is the state of this team. Steve Cohen earlier today addressed Mets fans after this embarrassing season. Mets fans everywhere, I owe you an apology. You did your part by showing up and supporting the team. We didn't do our part. We will do a post-mortem and figure out the obvious and less obvious reasons why the team didn't perform up to your and my expectations. We were all feeling raw emotions today. I know how much time and effort you have put into this team. The result was unacceptable. Your emotions tell me how much you care and continue to motivate the organization to do better. Thank you to the best fans in the world. But this is part of the problem. I love Steve Cohen. And of all the people, I think he obviously gets the least amount of blame because Juan Soto would not be a Met if it wasn't for Steve Cohen. I think Steve Cohen has put a tremendous amount of resources not only into the ballpark, but into the experiences at Citi Field. But here's the problem. When you sign Juan Soto, when you took over this team in 2020 and you promised that the World Series, your goal was a World Series in the first 5 years of this running this team, and the team hasn't even gotten to the World Series in the first 5 years. You made an NLCS, and that's about it. I do think that Cohen is going to make changes. I think you're going to see changes as coaching staff. Obviously, in David Stearns' presser today, again, took a lot of the blame, wouldn't get into specifics, but they did say Carlos Mendoza's back next year. I'll be honest, I didn't love how Mendy was down the stretch. I didn't like especially the way he handled this bullpen. You know you have an overworked bullpen, and one of the things that always irked me was when he would get the stars after 80 pitches. I'm like, can you push some of these starters? But I think Mendy comes back on a very short leash. I think you're going to see a lot of changes in this coaching staff going forward, and I think you're going to see big changes in this roster. So let's start with the roster construction, and then we'll go to the pieces. And again, your thoughts on who to blame. Who do you blame for the season? If you're joining us in the live stream, comment, super chat to jump to the front of the line. If you're joining us on the podcast, we are available wherever podcasts are available. Make sure to like and subscribe so you miss any of our shows, and comment for future videos. So I want to start with David Stearns because I do think that David Stearns is getting the most heat, and I do think a lot of it is warranted. Part of the difficult thing with the general manager is when you have success in a previous season, you have to decide what pieces were instrumental to bring back and also plan for this future. I think what happened to David Stearns is he got caught in the middle. He has built a very good prospect base. He has made the Mets to one of the best prospects teams in baseball in terms of the depth and the talent in their minor league system. And considering where they started, that is an achievement. But there's this weird in-between coming into the season where the Mets had all this young talent starting to come up through the system, but they weren't ready to go to yet. And you were looking coming into this season, how would they address this roster? What pieces would they bring back? What pieces would they let go? Certain pieces, in retrospect now, have hurt the most. I think the one person that was let go that doesn't get talked about is Jose Quintana. He's been a workhorse. He's been a great, reliable starter. And an innings eater, which the Mets desperately needed. You look at Jose Iglesias. I believe that the Jose Iglesias move is probably one of the worst for this team. Because when the Mets started rolling last year, it was when Jose Iglesias was brought to this team. He brought an energy to this locker room and to this fan base that is greatly appreciated. And the excuse was, well, we want to give the younger players time. Okay. But you've also seen that Jose had a huge impact when he returned with the Padres, how much this team loved him. And you see his impact with San Diego. He is not a everyday player, but he was a key instrument in this locker room, in this clubhouse that was much beloved. And not bringing him back for peanuts to be a backup, to me, was incredibly disappointing. Another guy was Harrison Bader. Harrison Bader, of course, killed the Mets single-handedly with the Phillies down the stretch, but had a great season last year, played his butt off. Now, again, I don't think Tyron Taylor was the worst cause on this team, but Tyron Taylor shouldn't have been this team's starting center fielder. I thought that was a bad move. The re-signing of Sean Manaea at the time, to me, of all the moves that backfired, this is the one I will give Stearns a little bit of leeway because Manaea got hurt. I think Manaea tried to rush back. I don't think he's right. I think he's got to do whatever surgery or rehab he needs this offseason. And once he has done that, then he can come back to this team. But the big one's Frankie Montas. $34 million of Frankie Montas was disgusting. AJ Minter, of course, the big contract, gets hurt early in the season. Ryan Helsley trade and Cedric Mullins were absolute disasters. The thing that always irked me about the Mullins trade more was Helsley, they used him because they had to. But Cedric Mullins, when they first made that trade and he didn't start playing immediately, I knew something was incredibly up. So as we look, this was a horrendous offseason for David Stearns. I do think that we have to also look at some of the good moves that he made. Again, it is a very short list, but I do think that one of the best moves that he did make and that I would really attempt to bring back next year was Canning. I thought that was a very good move with the pitching, and I think he's a priority for me to bring back. But let's look at this lineup, because I think there's a couple ways to look at the failure of this lineup. And I think the biggest problem is this. The big four had career seasons. They played well. They didn't play well in the clutch, some of them, especially I know people will say Juan Soto. But if you were to tell me before the season, and even with the start he had, Juan Soto was going to finish with 40 home runs, over 100 ribbies, 30 stolen bases, I said, you know what? That's a great first season. And you know what? He was paid to produce. And while he didn't produce all the time in the clutch, he still had a great season. You had Pete Alonso who came back and had a great season. You had Frankie Lindor have a great season. But this Met team, despite having great years from Frankie Lindor, 30-30, Pete Alonso, you look at Frankie Lindor, Brandon Nimmo. And again, Nimmo to me is the weirdest one because I look back at his stats, and I don't know if anyone else feels this way. I look back and I'm like, really? He had 25 homers and 19 RBIs. It sure didn't feel like it. But here was the big problem. What was the big difference between this team last year? They were getting a lot of production from their younger players. And to me, that has been the biggest difference between this team and last teams in terms of the lineup. I'll get to the pitching in a minute because there's a lot to dissect with this pitching staff. But the Mets came into this season with this idea that if one of the young kids stepped up, one of the young kids was able to really up their game or stay consistent, they would be fine. They were hoping that, for example, Mark Vientos, who bashed 30 home runs last year, would settle in as this team's DH and be a monster. And he was incredibly streaky, but when you look at the end of the day, he was 233 with 17 home runs, 61 RBIs. Didn't even crack 70 ribbies and 20 home runs, which is incredibly disappointing. You look at a guy like Brett Beatty. Brett Beatty finished down the stretch incredibly well. Finished the season with a 254 batting average. But 50 RBIs, 18 home runs. was incredibly streaky, couldn't fully settle as the second baseman and as a third baseman. Then you look at the kid I was really excited about was Ronnie Mauricio, who the Mets seem to have forgot the last month of the season and who I was banging the door to play more, but unfortunately couldn't take advantage of his opportunities, only 6 home runs, 10 RBIs. The other young player that I think it's hard to get on, but I do think there are now legitimate concerns with is Francisco Alvarez. Because Alvarez did not have a great season, was hurt, and wasn't available. And I know Francisco Alvarez is 23 years old. He's still young. But many people, including myself, were thinking, okay, this is going to be the year that he is going to take that next step, that he is going to be a really great player. In the first 2 full seasons, he struggled with the Mets. I mean, his best season was 2023, 25 home runs, 63 RBIs. And while I get the El Troll, I get the hype, I get the swagger that he has, the problem is he hasn't been producing. And I thought many people, including myself, thought this would be the year that Alvarez would take that next step, that he would turn into close to an all-star catcher. And that has not happened yet. The other thing that irked me too is this team doesn't seem to have plans for these younger players. And it was brought up in the press conference today, which I thought was interesting, is player versatility. Can they play in multiple positions? And while that is a great thing to have, they need to be really good players. And there's a certain player who I will get to in a minute who I do not want on this team next year. But it seemed like this team didn't have a plan for Luis Angel Acuna. It didn't seem like they had a foolproof plan for Brett Baty. It didn't seem like they had a plan for Mark Vientos. And unfortunately, while the top half of this offense produced, it felt like they got nothing from the bottom half of this offense. And that is incredibly frustrating and one of the big reasons why this team missed the postseason. So let's go around the horn. We'll go through the lineup. Then we'll go through the pitching staff. Who should they keep? Who should be moved on from? What can they do potentially? I think that there's a lot of change that's going to happen. Because one of the big things we have talked about as Met fans is that the Mets core, it feels like there's something off because this has been a core that has been together for a very long time. And when you look at the track record, and you look at the lack of urgency, you look at the lack of that killer instinct, it is a bit concerning where you look at where they currently are in terms of this core. Yeah, I like the core, but do I think that the core can be broken up? I think it is something I would definitely consider. And I do think that there are certain aspects to the team that we'll have to talk about. And again, there's investments in certain pitchers for this team that now when you look at this team, they're stuck with it. Again, super chat, jump to the front of the line, comment section, your thoughts on this season. Who do you blame for the Mets 2025 season? So let's go position by position. I think that this team really needs to keep the catching room the way it is. Luis Stearns has been a great backup catcher, great defensive catcher. Francisco Alvarez, I'm starting to get short on. Again, I know he's only 23, but has had 3 full seasons in the major leagues, has regressed in certain aspects. He's got to show he can stay healthy. Because if you're not staying healthy at the age of 23, that's going to be an issue as you get later into your 20s. So right now, I think the catch room doesn't move. The big question is going to be first base. Pete Alonso, and I think the comments are interesting, especially 24 hours after the season. When asked in the locker room, Pete didn't even say, oh, think about it. He's like, I'm opting out of my contract going to free agency. I would have done what Diaz did, which was say, let me talk to my family. But it's clear Pete wants to get to free agency, and he should. Played 162 games, had 38 home runs, 126 batted in, 41 doubles, which led to this team. All-star season. He deserves to go to free agency. I don't have a problem with that. I would have liked to see him handle it better. But it was interesting because David Stearns was asked in the press conference today, basically was like, had this season and the negotiation change how you felt about Pete. And basically Stearns says, we'll negotiate with Pete when we do. It basically was kind of like, eh. And Pete is a tricky player because we all love Pete Alonso. We all love what he has done, now this greatest home run hitter in Mets history. But the Mets are at a critical crossroads with Pete because Pete's going to be 31 next season. The hard part is, what is the Mets' long-term plan? It can't be just to stick Vientos at first, because again, I do think you can get something out of Vientos, but I have a different theory on Vientos. Alonso, to me, it depends on what he wants. If he wants a high annual salary but is willing to take less years, I think he comes back. If he can get a 3-year contract from the Mets, I think that's what the Mets would want. I don't think Stearns is going to go above 3 years, or at least have an option out. But the problem with Pete, which makes this so interesting, is he was a free agent last year. There was many talks, Toronto, of course, San Francisco, but now San Francisco's got Rafi Devers. There's a lot of teams that I think would be interested, but they don't like the price point. Because yes, Pete is a great power hitter. But as power hitters age, now he's getting into 31, 32. This isn't like you invested in a guy in free agency like the Mets did with Soto at 25, 26. You're going to be investing at probably the twilight years of his career. If the Mets can get a short-term deal done, I will do it. But I'm very curious to see how they're going to handle this. Because one aspect of Pete Alonso, which I think is very important to the Mets negotiation with him, is his stance on being a DH. Is he a liability at first base? No. But he is not a great defensive first baseman. And the question has to become from the Mets. In the next 3 or 4 seasons, do they plan on making him a full-time DH, and would Pete accept being a full-time DH? Because if he won't, that makes things complicated. I think eventually Juan Soto, as he gets into the second half of that contract, will transition to being the Mets' full-time DH. I think he will just become a hitter. The thing with Alonso is he seems like he wants to play first base. And I do have an intriguing location for him this offseason. I doubt they will do this, but one team I would keep an eye on is the Boston Red Sox. Because the Boston Red Sox have an opening at first base. They have that short Fenway Park, the Green Monster in left field. And also, it would be someone that I think that they could get on a more manageable contract than the Rafi Devers contract. Will they do it because they have a penchant not to spend money? I don't know, but that's a team I would watch for. But if you had to ask me today, I think it's 70-30 that Alonso's gone. I just don't think that the Mets want to invest a ton of money in a 30, 31-year-old player. And it's tough for this fan base because it comes down to this. It is, do you want Alonso back because of what he's done for this team or what he is going to do? And that is the tricky situation, because for what he's done, he should be a Met for life. But the problem is this organization, especially after the season they just had, they're saying, what is he going to give us over the next 3 to 4 seasons? And if it's declining performance at a higher contract, because the Mets already have a lot of contracts now invested in Lindor, you've invested a lot in Nimmo, who's not going anywhere. You have, of course, Juan Soto. I think it is something that Pete Alonso, unless he can get a short-term deal at the Mets, I think it's 70-30 that he's gone. Second base is very simple. I want Jeff McNeil off this team. Jeff McNeil, for what he is paid to be a high-end second baseman. At best, he's a utility man at this point. There are so many times this season where he comes up and he feels like an automatic out. And when at his best, he was a guy that would hit high 280, 290, 300, get on base. But you look at it right now, he was a 243 hitter, an OBP of 335, 54 RBIs, 12 home runs, not good enough, 33. He's one of the members of this core. I would trade him this offseason. They have to move on from him. I think it is done with Jeff McNeil. I've been done with Jeff McNeil for a long time, and it drove me nuts when I'd see McNeil in center. Explain to me, and I understand he's not a great hitter at this point. You have Luis Angel Acuna, who is a demon on the base pass when he can get on, had 16 stolen bases in the limited time he's with this team. He's played center field in the minors. There is no reason Jeff McNeil should be in center field at all this past season. That drove me absolutely nuts. And I know the Siri thing has blew up in their face. I know the Tyrone Taylor thing blew up in their faces. But if you're not going to promote Jet Williams, and this is what I will say, and I'll get to the young kids in a minute, he shouldn't have been in the outfield at all. They have to make a decision too. Lindor, we know he's going to be here. Is Beatty going to be third or second baseman? I think Beatty and Mauricio, I would go out and get a veteran to be the backup for the two of them. But I would look at it and go, either you're giving Beatty second or third, or you're giving Mauricio second or third, and you're figuring it out. Let them get a run at it because you have some young kids coming up as well, but let them see if they can settle in at either of those positions. Brandon Nimmo, that contract, they're not going to be able to move. He's in left. Tyrone Taylor, again, I think he's a valuable fourth outfielder, great defensive player, but he shouldn't be the everyday center fielder. Sterling Marte at DH drove me absolutely nuts. I don't know about you guys. I understand that the batting average is 270, but seeing how he couldn't run once he got on base, had 9 home runs and 34 RBIs, like he's gone. Get that contract off the books. I don't want him anywhere near this team. Now we get to the young kids. I talked about Alvarez. I don't think Alvarez is going anywhere for the time being. Luis Angel Acuna, they need to make a decision if he's going to be a middle infielder or outfielder. Give him a shot there. If they don't love him, try to use him as a piece. Because here's how I think the Mets address this rotation. I'll give you a brief synopsis of what I think they're going to do, and then I'll break down the rotation as a whole. I think that the Mets will look to add a frontline starter. I don't think it will be the way many fans think. We saw them with Dylan Cease try to go after them in the trade market. For me, I think what David Stearns is looking for, and especially now that he's built up this system, is he is looking for a controllable arm that's not going to kill them financially. He would rather have that, and if they pitch great, maybe reward them at the end of it. But he is not going to, in my opinion, go out and spend in free agency to acquire an arm and acquire a piece. So you have to make tough decisions. Which one of these kids do you project is going to be here and which ones aren't? Because I have a feeling that maybe it's Brett Beatty, maybe it's Luis Angel Acuna, it could even be Ronnie Mauricio, but I feel like one of those pieces is going to be gone from this team at some point in this offseason, and they're going to be traded for a pitcher. And I think the big name to watch is Vientos. There's a lot that can happen between now and spring training. The obvious is Pete Alonso. If Pete Alonso isn't back or the Mets aren't going to sign him, then the question becomes, do they address first base in free agency or do they move Vientos over to first? Now, again, I don't think that is fair to Vientos. I think that is an incredibly difficult situation to go into, especially after such a beloved New York Met. But I feel like Mark Vientos is arguably the Mets' best trade chip this offseason for a pitcher. He's 25. We know he's not a third baseman. But I think there will be a team out there that will look at Vientos as a full-time DH. Look at him that he was able to perform in the postseason in New York, and that they will include him in a deal. This is someone that last year had 27 home runs and 71 ribbies. This is someone that I think is a movable piece this offseason. So I would not be surprised if Vientos is moved. Again, comment section, give us your thoughts, players you want to see move, potential targets, your thoughts on the Mets season. Again, let's move on to the pitching, because I think the biggest culprit to the Mets season was the pitching staff. I don't think there's any ifs, ands, ifs, or buts about it. It was the pitching staff. And a lot of people, when we look back at this season, we'll look back and go, what was the big turning point? A lot of people go to Kodai Senga's injury in June. I'm the opposite. I think that the most impactful injury for the New York Mets was Griffin Canning. Because for the first few months of the season, Griffin Canning was this team's best pitcher. Canning was off to a great start. Canning gave this team 76 innings. I'll repeat, 76 innings in 16 starts. He was an innings eater. He was being efficient. He was a 7-3 starter. ERA came up a bit, but it was a 3.77. Like, this looked like a guy like last year with Luis Severino. Like, this was going to be their Luis Severino. When he went down, that changed the dynamic of this rotation. Because this rotation, when we came into this season, was a huge question mark. And again, they finished 27th in pitching this season. I think that's the biggest culprit. They have to make an adjustment with this pitching. But the thing is, a lot of these guys are likely back. Manaea, Peterson, Holmes, and Senga are all under contract. And so is, I believe, Tyler Miguel. Don't question me on that. Let me just check. Miguel is under contract. Manaea's expectations for next year is you want him to return to being a middle-of-the-rotation starter. David Peterson as well. I think that I give him a bit of a pass this year. He was an all-star pitcher, and I think the biggest problem with David Peterson was how he was utilized in this rotation. There was a stat at one point where David Peterson was the only Met that had gone to the 7th inning 5 times in this season when no other pitcher would. I think the problem was where this staff and Mendy was awfully cute, especially with Clay Holmes taking him out early. I still remember a game. I was with my buddy. It was the 5th inning. I think he threw 70 pitches and they took him out. And I'm like, this is the time to push him. But it was the opposite of David Peterson. It was, well, Holmes can't give us 6. Senga can't give us 6. The young guns can't give us 6. Can you push yourself and go the distance? And I think, and David Stearns even commented on it, this is the most innings he's ever pitched in a season. I think he got burnt out by the end of the season from overuse and over mishandling. So I feel he's going to have a nice bounce back year. I think Holmes is what he is. He's a solid starter, 12-8. I think that was one of the few good signings that they did. And when you look at what they're paying him, it's a valuable starter. The expectations for next year, though, are you cannot rely on Kodai Senga and Sean Manaea, which this team thought. They thought they were going to get these guys for 20 to 25 starts. Senga made 22, but man, down the stretch, it was a disaster. And since he got re-injured, he was not the same. If I could get out of the Kodai Senga contract, I would, but they have 2 more years. They're locked in. My big thing with this team is, and I know one of the things a lot of fans are going to push is for Nolan McLean to be the ace of this team. The New York Mets should not go into 2026 with Nolan McLean as the ace of this staff. At anything, he should be the number 2 pitcher, because even if he goes backward, which again, he had an incredible first year, there's no question about it. But even if, let's say, his ERA drops to 3 or 3.2 because it was 2.06 to end the season, that's still a very good pitcher, but not necessarily an ace. And I don't want to put this pressure on a 23, 24-year-old kid. Make it so you go out and get a number 1 pitcher so McLean doesn't have to be in that number 1 spot, and it takes pressure off of him. Because you know if they make him the number 1 pitcher, there's going to be those claims to be the next Jacob deGrom, and I already see it. I'm like, let the kid develop. This team should not have Brandon Sproat or Jonah Tong on this team to start the season. This team went through 40 pitchers this year. They should have Tong, especially, needs a little bit more development. Have them in the minors, have them ready to go, because we've seen it before. Injuries happen. And especially with Kodai Senga, he's probably not going to last long. A hot take for me is I would bring Griffin Canning back. I would bring him back on a 1-year deal. I would make Frankie Montas the long guy out of the bullpen. He's going to be late in the season. But I would bring Canning back. He was doing well with this pitching staff, especially this pitching lab. I would bring him back, have him to start the season, have him sell to him that you had your best success in the major leagues with our program. If you come back, we can continue to make you a great pitcher. But this team can go with a 6-man rotation, but they have to figure out this rotation. That is what's going to determine how far they go. And more importantly, and also the bullpen. You have a big decision with Edwin Diaz, 31 years old. He's opting out. I fully believe he's opting out. There's only one option if you're not getting Diaz. If you are not getting Diaz, you better pony up for Duran Duran. Because if you don't get either of those two closers, you're in a world of hurt. And even Duran, who is a younger closer, there's a difference between pitching in New York. And Diaz has proved he could pitch in New York. And Diaz was, to my opinion, the best pitcher the Mets had this year. 1.63 ERA was unbelievable. Came in. You can maybe count the times where he blew a game on one hand. They also need to address this bullpen. Guys I would bring back, I thought Tyler Rogers is fine. He's an innings eater. I would look to bring him back. I'd look to bring back Raleigh back. AJ Minter, you hope, is back for next season. But other than them, maybe Gregory Soto, this bullpen has to be better. And I'll give the bullpen a little pass because part of the problem was they were asked to throw too much. They weren't asked to get 9 outs. How many nights was this bullpen asked to get 12 outs, to get 15 outs? They need to figure out this bullpen. But the thing that will determine the Mets season next year is how they address the starting rotation. And they have to have a plan for these young kids. Because the Mets have a difficult transition. I think this team needs to have an infusion of youth. We've had the same Jeff McNeil. We've had the same Jesse Winker. Like, they were a very old team. And when the Mets last fell apart, they had a very old roster. They need to incorporate these kids, but they have to have a plan for these kids. When they get to spring training next year, there has to be a plan for Jet Williams. Is Jet Williams going to be this team's long-term second baseman or center fielder? And you stick with it. Yeah, if you need him in a pinch, can he play second or the outfield? Sure. But you have to be of a mindset, what is his role on this team? It can't be what's his role on this team today. It's his role on the team going forward. If you think that Jet Williams is a better second baseman or a better center fielder, you have to have a plan for him. Carson Bench, is he going to be your long-term answer at first base? You already have the corner outfields pretty much bottled up. He's another lefty bat. Do you have a plan for him? And here's another thing. If you don't have a plan for Carson Bench, can you use him to get another piece? But I will look at this, and yeah, he is a good outfielder, but do I think Carson Bench is a center fielder? Probably not. You have to have a plan for Jonah Tong and Brandon Sproat, what they need to work on. Ryan Clifford also knocking on the door. Is he going to be a first baseman? The Mets have decisions to make because they have a couple kids that could potentially be first baseman. But if you make the decision that Ryan Clifford's going to be a first baseman or that Carson Bench is going to be a first baseman, you have to stick to that plan. You can't be moving them around and have them until. I think that's part of the reason the kids struggled this year. You were moving Beatty third, second. You're moving Vientos DH third. You're moving Mauricio outfield here, there. Like, the versatility is nice, but I feel like the Mets at times overmanage these kids to a point where it was an incredible detriment. And look, this is going to be a long off season. I would also throw this out there. Expect the unexpected. Because I think that this team realizes that they have to make changes. Yes, the pitching lab works. Yes, the Mets have been able to find guys on the scrap heap in terms of decent starters, but they need more firepower in the front of their rotation. They need to address their bullpen, and they need to address the bottom of the lineup. And there will be players that we like that maybe the Mets deal. And there might be players that go to other places and have great careers. But if they give the Mets the pieces that they need to go and compete and get back into the playoffs and compete for a World Series, it is worth it. If Mark Vientos goes somewhere and bashes 40 home runs, but it comes back and brings you a front-end starting pitcher that helps you get over the hump, it was worth it. If Ronnie Mauricio turns into an all-star for another team, but it helps you win a World Series and helps you fill out this roster with the pieces it needs, that is worth it. The Mets have a lot of different directions they can go. They have a lot of different ripcords that they can pull. The big thing now for David Stearns and this organization is they have to pull the right ones. They have spent the money, but they have deserved everything that they are gone today on social media. Because here's the big thing, Mets. You told your fan base, it was to the point where we went, what is going on at the beginning of the season? You told this fan base, show up for this team this year. Come out and support this team. And this team did. They set an attendance record at Citi Field. But for the last 3 months, and trust me, I saw it at Citi Field as many of you have, the product on the field was a 38-55 mess. And part of the thing that needs to change is the culture around this team. And that's one of the reasons I think this core needs to be broken up. Because it was a different attitude last year. They were behind the 8 ball, and they got on a hot streak, and they looked and like, look, we have to play well this season, and we have to just keep fighting. I think the biggest problem for this team was this team had a confidence about them that they did not deserve. They got out to the best record in baseball, and I think that they smugly thought, you know what, we can just mail it in a little bit, or you know what, we're so talented, we're going to get to the postseason. When things start to go the other way, we're so talented. We kept hearing that from Mendoza and this team. They're talented. They're talented. They have talent. There's a big difference, though. You can have all the talent in the world, but if you do not have a good team, you're not going to go places. And I think this Met team realizes that they let a lot of their soul go this offseason with guys like Jose Iglesias and Harrison Bader. This team was in a position where they were throwing 3 rookies down the stretch of the season. If I was to tell any baseball fan, a team is trying to make the postseason and they are starting 3 rookies in the starting rotation that were not here before September, you're like, they're dead. But to their credit, the rookies battled and they gave this team an opportunity to win. And this is the thing. The Mets blew this. Cincinnati finished down the stretch under 500. The Mets have one thing to do. Look in the mirror and see what's staring back at you, because that is what you are. You are a team that had the best record in baseball and you couldn't finish it. And I hope this is motivation for next year, because you're going to be a laughingstock all offseason. You puffed out your chest with Juan Soto. You told us all as Met fans, go brag how good this team is going to be. Be proud of this team. And we were for the first half of the season. And now we're sitting here hearing the ridicule. You're like, you're deserved. It's well-deserved. This team did not finish, and they were not a team. They were not well-constructed. They were not well-managed, and they have to make changes. And sometimes you have to have these disasters to have change. You have to have these gut punches to make you go, something needs to change. Because maybe this is the best thing for this team long-term. Let's say this team somehow stumbled in the postseason, got their A's kicked over in Los Angeles, and then went through this offseason saying, you know what, we're still a good team. We were able to still get to the postseason. You know, we were going through it last year. We'll figure it out. And then if they went through this again next season, it would have been even harder. Now at least they know we have holes on this team and we have problems. And now it's time to address them this offseason. We'll be here off season for New York Mets Hot Stove, breaking down all the latest signings and trades, all the rumors. Again, if you're new to the channel, give us a like and subscribe so you miss any of our latest shows. If you're joining us afterward, make sure to reach out in the comment section with your ideas for future videos. But until next time, I'm your host, Nolan Rich, and this has been Rich Sports Talks. We will see you this offseason for more New York Mets content.